Scientists found a population inside living human DNA, a group that makes up the majority of the oldest Iranian genome ever sequenced, but they have never found a single bone, a single grave, or even a name for these people. In 2016, a researcher named Dr. Farnaz Broushaki, working at Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz, Germany, led a team that sequenced the genomes of some of the earliest known people from the Zagros mountains of Iran, ancient DNA, thousands of years old. And when her team compared that ancient DNA to living populations today, something came back that nobody expected. The Zoroastrian community, the people like Ardashir, tending fires in Yazd right now, are genetically closer to a skeleton buried in the Zagros mountains around 9,800 years ago than they are to Muslim Iranians living 3 streets away. Not spiritually closer, not culturally closer, genetically closer, in hard DNA percentages. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. The reason this happened is something called endogamy. The Zoroastrian sacred text, the Vendidad, written around 500 BCE, explicitly prohibits marriage outside the faith. And when Arab armies completed their conquest of Persia in 651 CE, one of the most transformative events in the history of that region, every surrounding Iranian population began absorbing new genetic ancestry. The Zoroastrian community did not. For 1,400 years, they held the line. And inside their DNA, preserved like something sealed in amber, they carried the genome of Neolithic Iran almost intact. If you've ever wondered where you really come from, and I mean really, you're going to want to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. But here is the part that should stop you cold. Inside that preserved ancient genome, inside the Zagros DNA that Brouchaki's team was reading, they found something that doesn't belong to any known people on Earth. Up to 66% of the earliest Iranian ancestry in the record traces back to a population that has never been physically found. No burial site, no confirmed skeleton anywhere on Earth, no name. Scientists have a term for them, the Basal Eurasians, and that term is all they have. Ardashir is real. His fire is real. His genome is real. But the people whose blood makes up the majority of the oldest Iranian DNA ever sequenced, they are a ghost living inside a living man. And what made them different from every other human being who ever walked this planet is something that, by every rule of genetics, should not be possible. Before we go further, I want to know something about you. Has anyone in your family ever taken a DNA ancestry test? What did it reveal? And did it match what your family always believed about where you came from? Drop it in the comments below, because what this video is about to show you might completely change how you see that answer. Possible. That was the word scientists kept using when they first saw this number. Possibly 0, possibly none. Leipzig, Germany. The Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, 2016. A computational geneticist named Dr. Iosif Lazaridis, working at Harvard Medical School, was running population models across 44 ancient Near Eastern genomes. And in one of those samples, from the earliest Iranian Mesolithic layer, a number came back, 66%. Being that is the proportion of ancestry that could not be traced to any known population in the ancient DNA database at that time. Not a small percentage, not a marginal signal, the majority of a genome, from people no one had ever found. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what the model predicted. Because here is what made the Basal Eurasians different. It wasn't just that they were missing from the archaeological record, it was what was missing from their DNA. Every non-African human population on Earth carries Neanderthal DNA. Between 1.5% and 4% of your genome, if you have any non-African ancestry, came from Neanderthals. This happened between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago, when modern humans moving out of Africa encountered Neanderthals in Western Eurasia and interbred. It happened to nearly everyone. The evidence is in billions of people's cells right now. The Basal Eurasians have almost none of it, possibly 0. The finding of little, if any, Neanderthal ancestry in Basal Eurasians, as Lazaridis wrote in Nature in 2016, could be explained if the Neanderthal admixture event largely occurred after the Basal Eurasians had already split from all other non-African humans, which means they were somewhere else, somewhere isolated, somewhere that the rest of humanity was not, during the entire period that everyone else was mixing with Neanderthals. This is not a subtle distinction. The Neanderthal admixture event is one of the most well-established events in human prehistory. For a population to have missed it entirely, they weren't just genetically different, they were physically somewhere else, and for tens of thousands of years. Now think about what that means. The woman buried at Ganj Dare, Treasure Valley, in the Zagros mountains of Iran around 9,800 years ago. She belonged to this lineage. She had black hair, brown eyes, she was lactose intolerant, she was placed on her side by people who knew her, and inside her bones, sequenced nearly 40 years after they were first excavated, was the genome of a population whose separation from their nearest neighbors was calculated at somewhere between 46,000 and 77,000 years ago. That is not a rounding error. That is a gap in human prehistory so large it swallows every assumption you had about where civilization came from and the place these people were hiding during all of that time. Scientists have one candidate. It doesn't exist anymore. Doesn't exist anymore. That is the most precise description of a homeland ever recorded in the geological record. Open a map of the Persian Gulf. Look at the water. At its deepest, it's only about 90 meters down. In most places, much shallower, 35 meters, sometimes less. And 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, when sea levels were 120 meters lower than they are today, that entire basin was dry land, an area roughly the size of Great Britain, with 4 rivers flowing into a central lake, with coastlines, with fresh water, with a climate in that ancient world that was relatively hospitable compared to the scorched desert surrounding it. In 2010, an archaeologist named Dr. Jeffrey Rose at the University of Birmingham published a paper in Current Anthropology that asked a question nobody had seriously asked before. What if people lived there? What if the exposed Gulf floor was a refuge, a place where a human population survived in isolation for tens of thousands of years, cut off from the rest of Eurasia by the desert to the north and the sea to the south, developing a genetic identity completely their own? This discovery was made in 2010. It didn't make the history books, not until the DNA caught up. Because when researchers started mapping where Basal Eurasian ancestry was highest in the ancient and modern record, the signal didn't peak in Europe. It didn't peak in Anatolia. It peaked in early Iranian populations and in ancient Gulf Arab populations, the people geographically closest to the edges of that submerged basin. The genetic signal radiates outward from the Gulf like a crater pattern. The further you move from the Gulf, the weaker the signal gets. And then the sea rose. Not all at once, slowly, over thousands of years, between 12,000 and 6,000 years ago. Generation by generation, the coastline crept inward. The rivers backed up. The lake filled with salt water. The land shrank. Imagine watching your horizon disappear into the sea. Not a metaphor, not a story passed down. A geological fact, playing out across the lifetimes of the people who lived there. They moved, north into the Zagros, west toward the Levant, east toward the Indus. The world didn't lose them, it dispersed them. And every early Iranian genome that carries the Basal Eurasian signal is, in some sense, the genetic memory of a community watching their world go underwater. There is a small ancient religious community in southern Iraq and southwestern Iran called the Mandeans. They perform all their sacred rituals beside rivers. Their oral traditions speak of ancestors who fled a great catastrophic flood from the south. Their DNA has not been fully sequenced and published. That absence sits in the scientific record like a question no one has answered, because the people who left the Gulf, whoever they were, left descendants everywhere, in the Zagros, in the Levant, in the genomes of hundreds of millions of people across South Asia today. Their grandchildren may have built Mesopotamia, they may have built something even larger. And they still have no name, no language, no artifact that anyone can point to and say, that was theirs. Every civilization we know about sits on a genetic foundation laid by people we cannot identify. Unknown. That word follows this population everywhere, even into the city they appear to have helped build, southeastern Iran, Sistan province, 3,330 BCE. A city rises from the desert at a place that will eventually be called Shahar-i Sokhta, the burnt city. At its peak, 25,000 people live here. 25,000. That makes it one of the largest cities on Earth at the time. It has a writing system. It has trade networks reaching across Central Asia. And inside one of its burial sites, archaeologists found something that still gets passed around in medical history lectures today. A human skull with a 10-centimeter bronze and bitumen artificial eye inserted into the socket, the world's first recorded ocular prosthetic. And in a separate burial, a skull showing signs of a completed surgical trepanation, a hole drilled into the bone, with partial regrowth, meaning the patient survived brain surgery in southeastern Iran in 3200 BCE, and then the DNA from 11 individuals in those same burial layers came back from the lab. And everything I just told you about where these genetic lineages come from, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. The genomes from Shahar-i Sokhta carried Y chromosome and mitochondrial haplogroups from multiple distinct ancestral streams. Some were consistent with the Zagros lineage, the Basal Eurasian carrying ancestry we've been tracking, but others showed markers characteristic of South and Central Asian populations. Haplogroup M, haplogroup L lineages that appear in Bronze Age populations ancestral to modern Pakistanis and Indians. They appear here, in this Iranian city, 500 years before the Indus Valley civilization reaches its full peak. For decades, archaeology described Shahar-i Sokhta as a city shaped by outside contact, a recipient of cultural influence from Mesopotamia and the Indus. The DNA inverts that completely. This wasn't a city at the end of a migration route. It was the convergence point, where the Zagros lineage, the South Asian lineage, and the Basal Eurasian signal were meeting and mixing in real time 5,000 years ago. And the woman with the trepanation scar, the one who survived brain surgery, her mitochondrial DNA type most closely parallels Bronze Age South Asian lineages. A woman with South Asian ancestry surviving surgery in southeastern Iran in 3200 BCE. The migration paths these genetics traced brought people here from directions that no map of ancient migration had predicted. Actually, if you watched my last video on Iran's ancient connections to the Arab world's DNA, you saw the western branch of this story. Now you're seeing the eastern branch. Did that video change how you see the genetic connections across this region? Tell me in the comments, and then stay right here, because what's coming next is what that entire video was building toward. A 2025 study published in Scientific Reports analyzed 50 ancient individuals from 9 different sites across the Iranian plateau, spanning nearly 6,000 years. The Bronze Age Shahar-i Sokhta population was the most genetically diverse cohort in the entire dataset. And then, somewhere between the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, that diversity collapses. The mosaic disappears. Something ended the convergence. Shahar-i Sokhta burned 3 times. The final burning, around 1900 BCE, was followed by permanent abandonment. 50 years of archaeological excavation have found no mass burial, no weapon cache, no attacking army. The city's 25,000 people simply left after the third fire. In 50 years of digging, no one has found where they went. Went east. That's what the DNA says. Where the lineage went east, and what it built there is something 2 billion people alive today have been told a different story about. Harappa, Pakistan, 2019. A researcher named Dr. Vaghish Narasimhan, then at Harvard Medical School, working alongside a team at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, published a study in Science that sequenced 523 ancient individuals from across South and Central Asia, covering 8,000 years of human prehistory. It is one of the largest ancient DNA datasets ever assembled. When the ancestry breakdown of the Indus Valley civilization founders came back from the analysis, the result was clear and immediate. The single largest genetic component of the people who built Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro was not South Asian hunter-gatherer ancestry. It was Iranian Neolithic ancestry, specifically Zagros-type ancestry. The lineage we've been tracking, the lineage that carries the Basal Eurasian ghost. This isn't just ancient history. This is in the DNA of more than 2 billion people alive right now. Because here is what the timeline shows. The steppe ancestry that many modern South Asians carry in significant amounts, the Indo-Aryan component, arrived after the Indus Valley civilization had already collapsed, around 1900 BCE. The IVC itself was built before that wave, by people whose deepest genetic ancestry traces to the Zagros Mountains of Iran, and behind the Zagros, to a lineage that may have come from the floor of the Persian Gulf. The world's most sophisticated Bronze Age urban civilization, grid streets, standardized fired bricks, made drainage systems more advanced than anything in contemporary Mesopotamia, was built by people whose origin in the genetic record points back to Iran, and behind Iran to a people with no name. Run the chain forward: Basal Eurasian ghost population, Zagros Neolithic farmers, Shahar-i Sokhta convergence, Indus Valley founders, modern South Asia. That chain connects to over 2 billion living human beings, the people who have no name, no confirmed homeland, no physical remains. They are the genetic great-grandparents of more than a quarter of the entire human species. In the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro, in a destruction layer dated to around 2000 BCE, early excavators found 44 skeletons scattered in alleyways and streets, unburied, some with signs of violence, some without. They were called, informally, the massacre victims, though their ancient DNA has never been fully published. The genetic story of what happened to the people who built the Indus Valley civilization, where they went, what became of them, remains one of the most studied and least resolved questions in the entire field. And now, here is the inversion that changes the meaning of everything you've just heard. For over a century, the Indus Valley civilization has been framed as a South Asian achievement, a homegrown Bronze Age civilization. The DNA record says its primary founding population was Iranian in genetic origin, and behind that, Basal Eurasian, which means the civilization that multiple national identities have claimed as their genetic and cultural starting point was built by immigrants from a people who have no country, no artifact, and no surviving memory. And history didn't just erase the Basal Eurasians. It gave their grandchildren a completely different story about who they were, and those grandchildren are still alive. And for about 18 months, scientists thought they finally knew where the people behind all of this had lived. Dr. Jeffrey Rose publishes the Persian Gulf Oasis paper. The genomic gradient fits the geography. The timeline fits the geology. The isolation fits the population modeling. For the first time, the Basal Eurasian mystery appears to have an address. The floor of the Persian Gulf, dry land during the Pleistocene, submerged by rising seas, its former inhabitants dispersed into the surrounding world. Science journalists ran with it. Wikipedia was updated. Review articles started citing it as the likely answer. The mystery, it seemed, was solved. Now, what they found next changed everything we thought we knew, or rather, what they didn't find. Because the problem with the Gulf Oasis hypothesis is this: you cannot test it. There is, as of 2025, no ancient human DNA recovered from the Arabian Peninsula predating 4000 BCE. The people who would confirm or deny this theory, if they lived on the Gulf floor, are under 35 meters of saltwater, in sediment cores that have not yet yielded a single human genome. The genomic gradient that points toward the Gulf fits the Gulf, but it also fits the Nile Valley. It fits the Levantine coast. It fits other submerged land masses in the Red Sea basin. The model cannot be falsified with the evidence currently available. A team from the Max Planck Institute has been drilling sediment cores from the Gulf floor, extracting ancient plant pollen, animal traces, microbial records, searching for sustained signs of human habitation. As of the most recent major Iranian genomic study published in Scientific Reports in 2025, no ancient human DNA has been recovered from those cores. The Gulf has been searched. It has not answered. Meanwhile, the science journalism that declared this solved has not published corrections. The public record says the mystery is resolved. The primary academic literature says, we don't know, and there is something else, something quieter and stranger. A preprint exists. Posted to a preprint server, peer-reviewed internally, never formally published in a journal, been never retracted, that modeled an alternative origin for the Basal Eurasians, not the Gulf floor, not a migration from the south, the Iranian plateau itself. The possibility that the Basal Eurasians were never migrants at all, that they were the original inhabitants of the Iranian plateau, absorbed in place by the Neolithic farmers who emerged around them. Their ghost signal, not the echo of a drowned homeland, but simply what was always here. That preprint exists in the scientific literature the way a ghost exists in a house. Present, unconfirmed, not cited in any major population genetics paper since 2020. Impossible to dismiss once you know it's there. The answer that everyone agreed on is contested. The alternative has never been tested. The mystery that appeared to be solved is, in the actual scientific record, still completely open. The ghost. That word keeps appearing in this story. But here is the strangest ghost of all. 5 empires walked into Iran. The genome barely flinched. 550 BCE. Cyrus the Great founds the Achaemenid Empire, 5.5 million square kilometers, stretching from Egypt to Central Asia, the largest political structure the ancient world had yet seen. It absorbs Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, Lydians, Medes, and Scythians. Then 200 years later, Alexander the Great dismantles it, and in 324 BCE, at the city of Susa, he orders something extraordinary. 10,000 of his Greek and Macedonian officers are to marry 10,000 Persian women in a single mass ceremony. One day, 10,000 couples, the largest deliberate genetic mixing event in the ancient historical record. There are 3 things the 2025 Iranian genomic study revealed about what all of this did to Iranian DNA. The third one is the one that matters. The study, led by a multi-institutional team including researchers at the University of Vienna and the Iranian National Museum, analyzed 50 ancient individuals across 9 sites spanning 4700 BCE all the way to 1300 CE. That covers the Achaemenid Empire, the Macedonian period, the Parthians, the Sassanids, and the early Islamic era. Nearly 3,000 years of empires, conquests, forced migrations, and population movements, all measured in DNA. The first finding, there is measurable Western genetic influence in some periods and sites, evidence of contact, of mixing at borders, of populations moving through. The Iranian plateau was never completely sealed. The second finding, steppe-related ancestry arrives in detectable amounts in certain Bronze Age layers, consistent with broader patterns across Western Eurasia. And the third finding, the one that matters, is that the ancient Iranian Neolithic baseline, the Zagros-derived Basal Eurasian carrying core, remains the predominant genetic component across every single era in the dataset: Achaemenid period, Macedonian period, Parthian, Sassanid, early Islamic. The ancient signal holds through all of it. Alexander's 10,000 couple wedding at Susa? The Greek component shows up briefly in the Achaemenid era samples. Then it disappears within 2 to 3 generations, absorbed. The single largest enforced admixture event in recorded ancient history left almost no lasting trace in the population it was meant to transform. So now, here is the part that changes the political meaning of this entire story. In public discourse, in the cultural memory of the region, the transition that occurred in 651 CE, when Arabic-speaking Muslim armies defeated the Sassanid Empire, is often spoken of as a rupture, a break in the continuity of Iranian civilization. That is a conversation about culture, faith, language, and identity, and it is a profound one, carrying deep significance for millions of people. But the genome, which only sees biological ancestry, registers almost no change at that moment. The Islamic era samples in this dataset are genomically continuous with the Sassanid samples immediately before them. What the genome records as continuity and what history records as transformation are 2 completely different stories. The genetic story and the civilizational story are not the same story. They never were. What that means is this: whatever rupture left the deepest mark on the Iranian genomic record, it didn't happen in 651 CE. It didn't happen when Alexander arrived. It didn't happen when the Mongols came. The genome survived all of those, which means the event that actually left a biological scar, if one exists, happened somewhere else in time, and no study has yet found it. When? That question has no answer yet, but the genome did record something older than any empire, stranger than any conquest, and more intimate than any war. Population genetics has a tool called runs of homozygosity. It works like this: when a population goes through a catastrophic bottleneck, a sudden, severe collapse, where only a small group survives to reproduce, the survivors pass down long, identical stretches of DNA inherited from both sides of their family tree. The longer those runs, the more severe the bottleneck. It's essentially the genome recording a near-extinction event and carrying the scar forward across every generation that follows. The woman from Ganj Dareh, the 9,800-year-old skeleton from the Zagros, her runs of homozygosity are shorter than those found in Caucasus hunter-gatherers and Western European hunter-gatherers from the same period. That's a specific and important difference. It means her population did not undergo the major bottleneck that nearly wiped out those other groups. While populations across Eurasia were collapsing during the Younger Dryas, a sudden and severe cold period between 13,000 and 11,000 years ago, when temperatures dropped by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius within decades, the Zagros population held. Their genome shows it. They maintained a larger effective population size through the catastrophe than any comparable group in the region. Think about what that means in human terms. Other populations were being reduced to tiny remnants, their gene pools narrowing to near extinction, their survivors clinging to whatever habitable pockets remained. And the Basal Eurasian lineage, the people whose genetic signal runs through the Zagros skeleton, through the Zoroastrian genome, through the founders of the Indus Valley. They came through the other side, not unscathed, but intact, in larger numbers than their neighbors, in a place that the Younger Dryas did not reach with the same force it reached everywhere else. Now here is the part of this that crosses from ancient history into something personal. The near-zero Neanderthal DNA in the Basal Eurasian lineage isn't just a genetic curiosity. Research on Neanderthal introgression has found that the specific genomic segments inherited from Neanderthals affect real biological functions, immune response, skin adaptation, certain aspects of neurological development. Every other Eurasian population acquired some version of these adaptations. The Basal Eurasian lineage, having missed the admixture event entirely, did not. They went through the Ice Age, through the Younger Dryas, and into the Neolithic without the genetic toolkit that Neanderthal interbreeding gave to everyone around them. And they survived anyway, longer than most, in better numbers than most. In Yazd today, in the fire temple where Ardashir tends the Atash Behram, Zoroastrian priests practice a 9-day purification ritual called the Bereshnum, one of the oldest documented ritual practices in any surviving religion. It involves a period of physical isolation, silence, and strict separation from the outside world before certain sacred acts can be performed. Scholars of religion have debated what ancient cultural memory this might encode. Geneticists, examining the 1400-year isolation that preserved Neolithic DNA inside the Zoroastrian community, have noted, without pursuing the implication, that the ritual isolation and the biological isolation appear to run in parallel. That may be coincidence, probably is. But the Zagros lineage survived the Ice Age, survived the Younger Dryas, survived every empire that crossed the Iranian plateau, survived without Neanderthal DNA, without the adaptive toolkit that ancestry provided to every neighboring group. And inside the genome of a man tending a fire in Yazd right now, the same fire, the same ritual, the same ancient isolation. The signal is still there, still measurable, still the dominant component. So let's put this together, because the full shape of what we've been building here is not what most people expect when they click on a video about ancient DNA. We started with a flame in Yazd that has been burning for 1,500 years. We traced it back through a genome that preserved Neolithic DNA because a community spent 14 centuries refusing to dilute it. And inside that preserved DNA, we found a signal belonging to people who have never been physically found. No skeleton, no site, no name. A lineage that carried almost zero Neanderthal DNA in a world where every other non-African human group carries between 1% and 4%. We followed that signal to the floor of the Persian Gulf, a homeland that may have existed and been swallowed by the sea. We followed it into the Zagros Mountains, where the world's oldest domesticated goats were managed alongside the world's most genetically distinct Neolithic population. We followed it into Shahar-i Sokhta, a Bronze Age city with brain surgeons and artificial eyes. Each where the genetic convergence between the Iranian plateau and South Asia was already happening 5,000 years ago. We followed it east into Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, and found that the Indus Valley civilization, one of the most celebrated Bronze Age achievements in human history, was built primarily by people whose ancestry traces back through the Zagros, through the Ghost, through the Unnamed. And then we watched it survive 5 consecutive empires without breaking. Here's the question that all of this leaves open. And I want you to sit with this one. The Basal Eurasian lineage exists in the genomic record as a statistical inference. It has been calculated, modeled, and confirmed across multiple independent studies by multiple independent research teams on multiple continents. The signal is real. The distinctiveness is real. The near zero Neanderthal ancestry is real. Every major ancient DNA lab in the world agrees on this, but no one has found them. Not one confirmed skeleton, not one burial site that can be pointed to and labeled. The most genetically significant population in the story of ancient Near Eastern civilization exists in the physical record exactly as much as a ghost exists. There are a few explanations. Their homeland may be underwater. Their bones may not have survived in the relevant environments. The archaeological sites may not have been excavated yet. Or, and this is the possibility that the 2025 continuity study quietly implies, they were never fully separate to begin with. The ghost may not be a visitor. It may be the original resident. The thing that was always here before the Neolithic farmers built their settlements, or before the Bronze Age cities rose, before the empires came and went. The most complete ancient DNA dataset ever assembled for the Iranian plateau shows 3,000 years of genomic continuity. The earliest layer of that continuity carries a signal that is 66% from people we cannot name. If that bothers you, if the idea that the founding ancestry of multiple major civilizations belongs to a people science cannot identify bothers you, then you understand exactly what this field has been sitting with for the better part of a decade. If the next study finds the bones, the entire story changes. If it doesn't, then the ghost is still in the house. And by every measure available, it has been there since before we started looking. Wikipedia +10.